All right, the major news today is that the Strait of Hormuz has been declared open. This time, both the United States and Iran have announced the opening. Trump posted 9 tweets within 42 minutes this morning. So basically, it's an announcement that an agreement has been reached with Iran either through war or peace. In other words, all of a sudden, overnight, the entire situation has undergone a major change. Has the war that started on February 28th and continued until today come to an end? This is the major topic we're bringing you today. All right, welcome to Good Morning America. Hello to our YouTube viewers and greetings to all the listeners of Silicon Valley FM 96.1. If you hear me breathing heavily, it's not because I have a lung problem, it's just that I climbed the stairs too quickly just now. Alright, anyway, everyone was in a rush this morning, hurrying to get to the studio for this show. Okay, let's get right to the main topic. The biggest news today, Trump. This morning he tweeted announcing that Iran has just declared the Strait of Hormuz is now fully open and ready for unrestricted passage. What's going on here? Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi posted on X, stating that in accordance with the spirit of the Lebanon ceasefire agreement, during the remaining ceasefire period, the passage through the Strait of Hormuz for all commercial vessels has been declared fully open. Ships can sail according to the coordinated routes previously announced by the Iranian authorities. What does this mean? It means there are 2 ceasefires. One is the ceasefire announced between Israel and Lebanon. Because of this, Iran's foreign minister said that Iran is now fully opening the strait. So, what's really going on here? What's actually happening? Before we get into that, let's first talk about the market's reaction. The stock market immediately jumped about an hour ago. I haven't checked since, but the Dow Jones was... It jumped by 1.33%. The Nasdaq also jumped by about 1%, and the S&P 500 rose by 0.8%. But I don't think the stock market is the most important thing here. The price of Brent crude oil in the UK dropped by 11%. And the price of West Texas crude oil dropped by 9%. Brent is considered the international benchmark for crude oil prices. As for New Texas crude oil, that refers to the US crude oil price, which dropped by about 10%. So what exactly is going on? There are 2 reasons. One is the superficial reason, and the other is the real reason. Which one do you want to learn about? I'm just deliberately keeping you in suspense here. So which one do you want to hear first? Let's start with the superficial reason. All right, the superficial reason is what Araghchi just mentioned, and it's also how all the mainstream media are reporting it right now. To put it in English, Israel is currently waging war against the militant group Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hezbollah is one of Iran's closest allies. Iran insists that a ceasefire must first be achieved in Lebanon before it will reach a peace agreement with the United States. So, because last night, Thursday, the United States announced that Israel and Lebanon had reached a 10-day ceasefire agreement, this move eased tensions between the US and Iran. Since this obstacle was removed, Iran decided to also take a step back. The strait is now completely open. Okay, that's the apparent reason, but the real reason is actually not this at all. So why do I say that? And what exactly is the agreement reached between Lebanon and Israel? Let me first review and explain it for everyone. As everyone knows, the ceasefire agreement between the US and Iran started on April 7th and was set to expire on April 21st. However, in reality, there was no ceasefire on April 7th, because at that time, Iran insisted that the ceasefire must also include a halt to hostilities in Lebanon. That is, Israel could no longer attack Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. But the Trump administration said that was not the case at all, that they had never discussed this issue, so this became a point of contention between the 2 sides from the beginning. Then, Secretary of State Rubio invited representatives from both Lebanon and Israel to Washington, D.C. for a meeting. This meeting was held the day before yesterday, and by yesterday, it was announced that a so-called Israel-Lebanon Peace Alliance, or LIPA, had been established, Lebanon-Israel Peace Alliance. Last night, a 10-point ceasefire agreement was released. I'll briefly go over the main points instead of reading each one. I'll focus on the main ideas. Lebanon and Israel will cease hostilities at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on April 16th, which was 5 o'clock p.m. yesterday afternoon. The initial duration is set for 10 days. During this period, first, Israel is prohibited from launching any offensive military actions, whether by land, air, or sea, against targets within Lebanon, regardless of whether those targets are civilian or military. Right, that makes a lot of sense. It's a ceasefire after all, otherwise why call it a ceasefire? Secondly, the Lebanese government will take concrete measures to prevent Hezbollah in Lebanon from launching attacks against Israel. This also aligns with the first point mentioned by Makes Us. So if both sides make progress, They agreed that after 10 days, this period could be extended, but there is a condition. If Israel is attacked, Israel reserves the right to self-defense. In other words, during this period, if Hezbollah in Lebanon still attacks Israel, then Israel has the right to strike back. At the same time, Israel does not accept the Lebanese government's demand for a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon, and has even expanded the security zone it already occupies in southern Lebanon. All right, let me give some commentary on this ceasefire between the two sides. This is for real, because both sides are willing, truly willing. Therefore, this will be a prelude to a historic and lasting peace agreement between Israel and Lebanon. That's why fireworks and celebratory gunfire have already appeared in the southern suburbs of Beirut. At the same time, looking ahead, the prospect is that 1.2 million displaced Lebanese civilians will be able to return home as soon as possible. That is, return to the southern part of Beirut as well as southern Lebanon. All right, so what is the key to this peace agreement? The key is that Israel's condition is the disarmament of Hezbollah. Now, speaking of Hezbollah, let's take a step back. Hezbollah was founded in 1982, so it has existed for 45 years now, almost half a century. It is a quasi-military force in Lebanon, and now it is facing the prospect of being defanged and disarmed. So, in 1982, here's what happened. Israel invaded Lebanon, right? The reason was to eliminate the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, which was stationed in southern Lebanon. Previously, after being taken in by Jordan, the PLO engaged in subversive activities within Jordan. Eventually, the King of Jordan used force to expel them, and after being driven out, they fled to Lebanon. So then, they stayed in southern Lebanon, and from there, used military force to threaten northern Israel. In response, Israel was determined to eliminate the PLO. At that time, after invading Lebanon, Israel hoped to support pro-Israeli Lebanese Christians to become the main governing force in Lebanon. Specifically, at that time in Lebanon, the Christian militia was called the Phalange Party. The goal was to make Lebanon, under the Phalange, a country friendly to Israel. So what happened? In 1982, Iran funded Hezbollah, which is the Shia militia organization in southern Lebanon, to fight against Israel. From that point on, Hezbollah began to rise. Later on, the PLO was indeed defeated. They were forced to withdraw from Lebanon. However, this vacuum that was left behind led to the rise of Hezbollah. During the Lebanese civil war throughout the 1980s, Hezbollah formed guerrilla units to fight against Israel. At the same time, they established their grassroots forces, somewhat similar to what the Chinese Communist Party did during the War of Resistance, quietly developing their bases and building up their armed forces. By the time of the 1990 peace agreement, which was a peace accord in Lebanon that ended the Lebanese civil war, as a result, overnight it became, first, a legitimate organization, and second, it was allowed to keep its armed forces. It's really quite similar to what happened in 1946 with the Chinese Communist Party. They kept their armed forces while negotiating legalization with Chiang Kai-shek in the peace talks. So after the civil war ended, Hezbollah transformed itself into a legitimate political party. In the year 2000, Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon, and as a result, Hezbollah's reputation soared. It was widely believed that their resistance there forced Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon due to heavy losses. So what happened then? The Lebanese government forces and Hezbollah's armed forces ended up with a division of labor. The Lebanese army was responsible for domestic affairs. The government forces handled domestic security, while Hezbollah focused on external matters, mainly dealing with Israel. Later, they also got involved in the Syrian war, supporting Syrian President Assad. But by that point, their actions had little to do with the Lebanese government, meaning that by then, Hezbollah had already become a state within a state, not obeying government orders, and even having its own representatives within the government. Including within the government itself, the Speaker of Parliament is always one of their people. So Hezbollah has become what you might call both an official and a bandit at the same time, a very peculiar phenomenon. Of course, the reason Hezbollah was able to become such a force is mainly because of the support from Iran's Revolutionary Guard. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard exports revolution to many places in the Middle East, primarily 5 locations, much like how the Chinese Communist Party exported revolution to Vietnam, Cambodia, Chile, and the Shining Path in Peru. So one of these is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, returning to our topic, the agreement. The agreement reached yesterday is a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon. The key point of the agreement is to disarm Hezbollah. The key issue is whether you can actually do it. If you could, why didn't you do it earlier? Right now, nobody knows the answer to this. Hezbollah has 50,000 troops, not just militias anymore, but what you could call a quasi-army. They have heavy weapons, rockets, missiles, tanks, artillery, they have everything. As for the Lebanese government forces, they only have light weapons, so in reality, they can't deal with Hezbollah's armed strength. However, over the past 2 months, significant events have occurred. First, Israel has dealt serious blows to and weakened Hezbollah. This includes the bombing with the pager device 2 years ago, right? That attack killed and wounded thousands of Hezbollah's core members. It also includes Israel's recent offensives and bombings in southern Lebanon over the past 2 months, including yesterday's airstrike, where 50 planes were dispatched. They bombed 100 locations and killed 250 members of Hezbollah's leadership. So this has already severely weakened them, to the point where the Lebanese government forces might be able to disarm them. This is the first uncertain factor. The second one, which is key, is that Hezbollah's big boss behind the scenes, Iran, has now been beaten down by the United States. So with Iran itself on the verge of collapse, does it still have the money and weapons to give to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to the Houthis, to Syria, and to the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq? That's a big question mark. In other words, in this situation, with no external support, and after being suppressed by Israel for 2 months, can Hezbollah still hold out without being disarmed by the Lebanese government forces? This is the main issue behind the current peace agreement. So that's what it is. This is the real reason. The premise of the peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel is to cut off Iran's influence in Lebanon. Do you think Iran would ever agree to open the Strait just because these two rivals want to cut off its influence in Lebanon? Isn't that absurd? Of course it's absurd, right? So the reason given by Iran's foreign minister is just a superficial one, not the real reason. So what is the real reason? It's just 6 words. In Chinese, 6 words. Really can't hold on anymore. Okay, so specifically, what are the 5 reasons when we break it down? First, since what's called the Iran War began on February 28th, the US has destroyed Iran's naval, air force, air defense, and mine-laying capabilities. That's already significant, but the key point is what happened last Monday. No, what I mean is the naval blockade that the US implemented this Monday. This is a fatal blow to Iran. You have to understand, in the first 3 days of the blockade, 13 ships tried to break through, what they call run the line. But by the 4th day, only 1 ship attempted it. Why is that? Because it's obvious that they can't break through, so they just don't try anymore. So no one dares to attempt it now. The US military's blockade is extremely, extremely effective. Not only are they enforcing the blockade outside the Strait of Hormuz, but at the same time, the US military is also in the Pacific, far away in the Pacific, hunting down Iranian boats and cargo ships. Essentially, this amounts to a global, comprehensive embargo against Iran. As everyone knows, in modern countries, no nation produces everything it needs by itself, right? Every country has its own division of labor. For Iran, from household appliances like washing machines to food, car parts, medicines, and medical equipment, all of these rely on imports. Especially for Iran, which has long been focused on military expansion at the expense of other sectors. So there are many things that simply aren't produced domestically. As long as they produce oil and steel at home, that's enough. They export oil and steel in exchange for everything else they don't make themselves. So, as a result of prioritizing military spending, Iran lacks many basic industries essential for people's livelihoods. What happens then? When the United States imposes sanctions, these are comprehensive sanctions, since Iran doesn't have domestic production capabilities, it can't achieve self-reliance or independence like the Chinese Communist Party claims to do. With no domestic production capacity at all, Iran faces a major predicament. Specifically, if oil exports are cut off, the Iranian government's cash flow is severed. It got to the point where they couldn't even pay the salaries of the military and the Revolutionary Guard. Secondly, its second major pillar of exports, the steel mills, had already been destroyed, causing a complete shutdown of steel production, which affected 5 million workers. 5 million workers and their families. So, 5 million people. Then, on April 27th, in just 10 days, Iran's oil industry is about to shut down as well, because all the oil storage tanks are completely full and oil can no longer be extracted. This will affect 5 to 10 million people. Okay, Iran has a population of over 80 million. Then moving on to the 4th reason, Russia has pulled back, withdrawing its support for Iran. And as for the Chinese Communist Party, not only have they pulled back, they've directly put pressure on Iran. Why, Ivan? Because Iran blockading the Strait effectively strangles the CCP, as a US counter-blockade would choke them. Now Iran is stuck with no supplies or allies, a total dead end. So they tried to find a way out by saying that a ceasefire must include not attacking their little brother in Lebanon. And what was the result? Well, your little brother wasn't attacked, but he was disarmed. In other words, his teeth were completely pulled out. In this situation, do you think you've achieved your goal? Is this enough for you to reopen the Strait? Of course not. He said this just to save face. So later on, Trump will actually confirm the analysis I just made. By the way, my analysis was done before Trump posted his tweet today. I'm talking about my own written analysis. The fifth reason, and this is a very fundamental one, Iran never actually blocked the Strait. Whether it's with naval mines or anything else, it was all just talk. Up to now, the US hasn't found a single mine. Now, there are some Chinese language social media accounts spreading rumors that the Chinese Communist Party gave Iran so-called smart naval mines, mines that are buried underwater, can float to the surface with buoys, and are supposedly connected to China's Beidou satellite system for remote detonation. They even claim that the Americans found a mine at the end of March and so on, analyzing how it supposedly works. I don't believe any of that. First of all, from a technical standpoint, it's extremely unlikely. Secondly, if the US military really had found something, it wouldn't be Chinese social media reporting it first. It would be the mainstream American media. Is that possible? Everyone knows that if this kind of secret were to leak out, it would be just like everything that happened during the Trump administration. Any US military personnel who leaked such information would be prosecuted and sent to prison. So this kind of news has absolutely no source. Basically, it's just stories being spread online, in my opinion. But fundamentally, we can see that the reason for the whole situation changing comes from the inspiration Trump got from Iran's blockade of the Strait. Iran blocked oil tankers from around the world, but let their own tankers pass. So I'll just blockade you in reverse. I'll let all the world's tankers through, but block Iran's own tankers. As a result, Iran basically went weak overnight. And by today, it's essentially surrendered and knelt down. Next, of course, the issue is about nuclear waste and enriched uranium. So about that. So a couple of days ago, there was something about nuclear waste in the countryside. I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll get to that. So when Trump said a couple of days ago that the next 2 days would be very interesting, a lot of things would happen, and sure enough, he wasn't exaggerating. So, what do you think? Now that things have reached this point, how would you rate Trump? On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give him? Feel free to share your thoughts. Next, let's move on to the next topic. Prominent pro-Trump commentators criticizing Trump. Why does Trump remain so hardcore? Regarding this topic, actually, I haven't finished talking about the previous issue, the ceasefire. I'll continue discussing it in the context of Joe Rogan in the next segment. So, America's top podcaster, Joe Rogan, once again criticized the US and Israel's war with Iran on Thursday, yesterday, saying that this Middle East war is just too terrifying. As everyone knows, Joe Rogan openly supported Trump before the last election, and he has a huge young audience. So, his support for Trump was a big help to Trump. But since the outbreak of the war at the end of February, Joe Rogan has repeatedly spoken out against it. He said, "I'm very confused. I can't believe we're actually fighting this war. When we started bombing, I just felt this can't be real. This whole thing is just terrifying." He said, "As soon as you get involved, you start firing missiles at towns, blowing things up, destroying infrastructure, blowing up bridges. Now Israel is even bombing Lebanon, and yesterday he was just talking about this." On the show, he said that he also admits the Iranian regime is terrible and mentioned its brutal treatment of protesters. However, he said that military intervention in the Middle East goes against Trump's campaign promises because at the time, Trump swore not to start any more wars, not to launch wars. So what about now? He said that for most people who voted for Trump or hoped for Trump to take office, one of the things that attracted them was the promise of no more wars. But now we are caught up in one of the craziest wars ever. What exactly is going on here? How is this still happening? That's what he said yesterday. So, how should we view Joe Rogan's criticism? Before I get into that, let me first mention that the dispute between Trump and the Pope is also escalating. So around April 7th of this year, the Pope directly condemned Trump, saying that Trump's threat to wipe out Iranian civilization tonight was truly unacceptable. The Pope said, truly unacceptable, or completely unacceptable. He mentioned that Trump has delusions of omnipotence and said that God does not bless any conflict. Then, on April 12th, Trump fired back. He posted a long statement saying that the Pope is weak on crime and terrible on foreign policy. Trump said, "I don't want a Pope who criticizes the President of the United States because I am doing what the voters overwhelmingly elected me to do." He also implied that the Pope was elected because he is American. So, the Vatican wants to use an American Pope to deal with Trump. He suggested that the Pope should focus on being a great Pope rather than a politician. So the next day, on the 13th, the Pope responded again, saying, "I have no fear of President Trump or the Trump administration." Why did he suddenly mention fear? Maybe he actually feels a bit afraid inside. He said, "I have no intention of debating with him, but I will continue to speak out loudly against war." Trump immediately responded again, saying that someone should tell the Pope that Iran has killed 42,000 innocent people. He said Iran must not be allowed to have nuclear weapons, as this would be extremely dangerous for the world. He also stated that he has the right to disagree with the Pope. So both sides have indeed escalated what can be called a war of words, which has led to internal divisions among American Catholic conservatives. It has also drawn the attention of international religious leaders. Some have even said that this could affect the 2026 US midterm elections. All right, let me share my thoughts here because this is having quite a significant impact. How should I put it? Let me explain to everyone. What are the benefits of this confrontation between Trump and the Vatican? In the last election, 62% of white Catholic voters supported Trump. But right now, the leaders of the American Catholic Church, including the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference, the Archbishop of Oklahoma, have already issued statements criticizing Trump. The Archbishop of Philadelphia, named Chaput, has also criticized Trump, as has the Pope. In addition, a member of Trump's own Religious Freedom Commission, Bishop Robert Barron of Rochester, has also criticized Trump. So now it is said that Trump's support among American Catholics has dropped from 62% to around 52%. Did you see that? It seems like Trump doesn't care. Do you know why he doesn't care? Politically, this doesn't seem very rational. Why argue with the Pope? Let the Pope say what he wants. But Trump always feels the need to respond whenever the Pope says something. How should we view this? Let me first talk about how to look at this issue, how to view war and peace. Right, you talked to everyone about this yesterday in this regard. Indeed, I actually agree. Good people are not willing to use force or violence to achieve their own goals. I think there's a basic principle here. Good people are not willing to use coercion or violence to accomplish their objectives. Otherwise, how could they be considered good people? What does it mean to be a good person? First of all, a good person is a kind person, right? So, kind people are not willing to use force or violence to achieve their goals. This is the meaning of peace, isn't it? In a peaceful situation, you give everyone space, you give others freedom, you give them tranquility. You allow people to express their own opinions, don't you? So in this respect, peace is absolutely right. But you can't stop bad people from using force and violence, including war. If bad people resort to these, then what should good people do? If, at this point, good people still insist that peace comes first and peace is paramount, then isn't that either being pedantic or appeasing? Therefore, when an evil war breaks out, or when evil actions often need to be stopped by war, that's just how human society is. So, good people, although they won't use force or war to achieve their own goals, will use war to stop war. This includes using war to stop evil, using war to prevent massacres in order to achieve true and lasting peace. This is my view on the relationship between war and peace. My opinion, okay? The second point, Trump's political strategy. Well, it really seems like there's no benefit in confronting the Pope. It reminds me of something. You know, this is something I personally experienced. Before the 2016 primaries, when Trump was running in the Republican primaries, right? He was really going all out against his fellow Republicans. He attacked Jeb Bush on the left, Marco Rubio on the right, and even took shots at Ted Cruz. He harshly criticized his competitors. He not only harshly criticized them, but also mocked and ridiculed them. It was really intense, as everyone probably remembers. So I have an American friend, he's not Chinese, who told me, as the owner of a media company and a veteran political journalist, that this was Trump's strategy. He's always been like this. I asked, why is that? He said, during the primaries, you have to be this way. You need to win over Republican voters, so you have to go hard. But once it's the general election, he'll become more moderate because then he needs to win over the whole nation. I said, oh, I see. At the time, I even made a special program about this media owner's perspective. But what happened? When it came to the general election, he didn't change at all. So back then, no one thought Trump would win the election in November 2016, but in the end, he did. Why? Because he didn't use any of that so-called political wisdom. He just stuck to his approach all the way through. Because Trump isn't a politician. He's not a typical politician. The reason he ran for office was because he believed in what was right and what was wrong. From beginning to end, he stuck to what he thought was right, and in the end, he let everyone see that. Because every American has their own sense of judgment, their own scale in their hearts. They won't just vote a certain way because of what the media says. They don't just vote however the media tells them to. Honestly, I've been in the United States for so many years, almost 40 years now. I think American voters are the most sophisticated voters. They aren't easily influenced by the media, including those so-called superstar celebrities from the entertainment industry who come out and make statements. You might think they're a big deal, that they can influence a lot of young people, but in reality they hardly influence anyone. That's why American voters have their own discernment. So Trump has this characteristic. He is a very, very unique person. From what I've observed, especially regarding the Iran issue, yesterday Mr. Tang Jinyuan, a good friend of mine, said something to me. Let me quote him. He said, "Trump is good at using the ways of a rogue to leave rogues with no way out. This is Trump's approach to dealing with rogues in politics. This is my view. Trump follows his own path, and in the end, he lets everyone see clearly whether or not they want to support him." So does he not make political calculations? If he thinks the Pope is wrong, he will say the Pope is wrong, even if in the short term he offends several bishops or some Catholics. But in the end, everyone will still see for themselves who is actually right, isn't that so? Okay, let me share another detail. This US Senator Graham, he revealed that he's very familiar with Trump, and he often shares some behind-the-scenes secrets with the media. He said that when he was in contact with Trump, Trump was directly negotiating with the Iranians. Just a few days ago, when Trump was talking with Iranian officials, the conversation was extremely intense. Trump shouted loudly, warning Iran, saying, "If you keep stalling, what consequences will there be?" He yelled so much that he lost his voice. "You know," Graham said, "I wouldn't want to be the Iranian on the other end of that call because Trump is just too fierce."